town thinking about this issue and what, of course, we all are experiencing as we watch the global climate crisis unfold. Third, a recognition that Concord is part of and should actively contribute to the fast-paced global, national, state, and municipal transformation from an economy powered by fossil fuels to an economy powered by clean energy. And fourth, a commitment to Concord's already existent sustainability principles. Next slide. Well, there we are. Okay. Here are the goals. And I want to remind us when they speak directly to the charge, they are in fulfillment of the Select Board charge to, quote, identify short-term and long-term energy goals. So this is a specific response to the charge. And as you see, we're recommending, because we're only an advisory body, a 25% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2020 and an 80% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2025. These are town-wide goals, importantly, not applying simply to one sector or as a pilot. They're town-wide goals applicable to all sectors, and the baseline is 2008. They come from the Global Warming Solutions Act. And here are the recommended immediate next steps. 1, for the Select Board to issue a policy statement to establish decreasing emissions as a criterion in all town decisions. This is to help the decision-making process occurring now in many different parts of town find a voice from you that will empower these decision-making bodies to actually understand that this is an important thing that should be a fabric of their thinking, whether it's the Historic District Commission or the Zoning Board or any other group. Second, for the town manager to hire a director of energy or some other title. And the reason we say some other title is because since words carry meaning, we have had considerable debate about what the title would be. Would it be a sustainability director, an energy director? And all of these nuances are important, and so we have, at this point, decided not to name or suggest a name. In addition to the director of energy or some other title, a consultant to assist the director to guide the town in designing and implementing a sustainable energy future consistent with the recommendations of this report. And for the Select Board to appoint a new advisory group to assist the town manager, the energy director, and the consultant. The reason for this, recognizing there are a lot of town committees, is that in a situation like this where there are emerging and important new policy problems that inevitably will be the subject of the work of the energy director and the consultant, it makes sense to have the advice of people in town offering assistance. And 4, to integrate the goals and recommendations of the Energy Future Task Force report into the Concord Municipal Light Plant's current strategic planning effort, which I think Mike referred to earlier, and the comprehensive long-range plan currently underway. So those are our immediate next steps, and by immediate we mean basically now.
Do we know in the year 2017, the baseline is 2008, how much progress has been made in reducing, or?
I don't, I'm Brian.
The next slide.
Oh, okay.
So it's about 10%.
10%, okay.
There is a, posted along with the material for tonight's meeting is a copy of the slide presentation that was made by the task force at their public hearing last week, and in that is a chart which seemed to me was made by you, only I don't know, Brian.
It will reappear.
It's going to reappear. Also, although there are answers to your questions, no doubt, one of the key things that needs to be done is to firm up that baseline. Right. I mean, the baseline is one of the reasons I hesitated is because it's not entirely clear, and it's important that be established and is a key jumping off point for any kind of measuring or, as you know, just based on the intelligence of the question.
But it's a nice slide. It compares a couple of periods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
The other question I had was why both the director and information to carry out?
Yeah, and again, these are things that we thought about a fair bit, and one could sequence these things. You could have a consultant sort of setting the table and helping select or you could have a situation as we are suggesting. I think the idea here is that it's time to get moving, and that the director can push things forward if at his or her side there is deep expertise to assist in that job, that we will move even more quickly than perhaps we would have if we had done it in an iterative way. On the other hand, there are different ways of handling this.
So may I add something?
Yeah, sure.
So we do know that there would, several months would be required in order to advertise for a director position and interview and actually hire someone. And so we imagine that the consultant might be a benefit to the town manager
Get up and running,
accelerating the process.
The consultant would not be an ongoing, be a limited term?
Yeah.
That would be the expectation,
1 to
right?
2 years. Okay, so to get at our charge, and this gets to slide 5, which is there, we set up subcommittees, 4 subcommittees: public outreach, baseline data, Concord Municipal Light Plant, and best practices. And I'm going to briefly describe each of these, starting with public outreach, slide 6. Public outreach was the subject of the first subcommittee I mentioned, an important element of the Select Board's charge. Very clear that that we were to do extensive outreach, and we agree with that and did so. We held 3 public meetings, each attended by 50 people or more. The first one was actually in the form of almost a discussion group set up. It was interesting and innovative in its structure. And we had 2 others, the last one just the other day. Through the work of Dan Gainsborough and John Dalton, members of the committee, we maintained a very close contact with CMLP, which we believe is obviously a key actor in all of this. We were very happy to have, at, I think, practically every meeting, CMLP's liaison, Laura Scott, who made some excellent comments and helped us understand things that we might not otherwise have known. And we appreciated the fact that Dave Wood himself came to one of our meetings and had an extensive discussion with us. So we tried to be in touch with that key element of any kind of success we might have. We had interviews with 7 key stakeholders. We created a townwide survey. We established an email box, which received many excellent comments from the public, many of them. Many were extensive and deep and filled with expertise and thoughtfulness. Similarly, members of the public also attended virtually every task force meeting and made many excellent comments at those meetings. We are very, very grateful, and I say this very sincerely, for the work of many people, some of whom are here, who thought very deeply about this and whose thoughts are reflected in our work. So thank you very much. Going forward, the task force will, as I think Mike mentioned, we're going to be at the Finance Committee hearing on the 27th. We're going to be at the Select Board meeting on March 27th, so we intend to continue to be involved, and no doubt we'll show up at the town meeting.
That'd be good.
So, slide 7.
That's the chart I was talking about.
Oh, there's the slide. That is thanks to the good work of Brian Foltz.
Well, it also Brad, Concord Nelson, and CSEC.
Okay. Thank you. Again, Brad and CSEC were among the people who were very helpful. So, as we started to discuss, a key first step in reducing Concord's carbon footprint is establishing the baseline. And that was the focus of our second subcommittee. Concord's energy data has been tracked since 2008 as the baseline for green communities designation, and this is analogous to the 2008 baseline actually prescribed by the Global Warming Solutions Act. And as I indicated earlier, the task force anticipates that the new director position will confirm the completeness of the baseline data and identify milestones for measuring progress towards meeting the strategic goals of reduced greenhouse gas emissions. Very, very key component of any success. The The work of the task force and our next subcommittee focused on the important contributions of the Concord Municipal Light Plant to the energy sector in town. Because, and as you all know, Concord has control of the power purchase portfolio at CMLP, it's in a very strong position to advance the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions from the electricity it sells to its customers in all sectors. It's this rationale, actually, that forms a key basis of the Energy Future Task Force recommendations with tactics aimed at the energy sector. Moreover, the Select Board's charge specifically asked the task force to consider the following question, and I quote, how can or should the mission of CMLP evolve to address new market competition, emerging opportunities, and new business models for operation? And it was that question that was very useful in empowering us to think pretty deeply about CMLP and actually to do what, in light of the importance and opportunity that CMLP presents, to dig in with the light plant in that way. And we're grateful for that direction that the charge provides. In light of this context, the task force suggests the following. We encourage the town manager and the select board to engage CMLP as a partner to integrate greenhouse gas emission goals into strategic planning. There should be wind at its back to be moving in this direction, and that wind can come with help from the select board and the town manager. And similarly, encourages the town manager and the select board to engage the light board as a partner to guide the implementation of strategic goals. Again, put the wind at these entities' backs with the involvement of
Is this directives, or how much financial implications is this?
all of the above, if you want, whatever would be appropriate to create the encouragement for an approach that supports what I think the charge is asking us to.
Did the task force get into what anticipated costs there might be?
No.
Yeah, I would say that the report has a rough order of magnitude estimate for what is anticipated to be a rate increase over time. There are many factors that will, need to be considered in that. And the task force has, importantly, I think it's important to say the task force has not done the analytics to answer all of these
It
questions.
might be something that the consultant would, in fact.
The
Exactly.
consultant to the light plant, the light plant
Itself,
staff,
the light plant itself.
Yeah.
will need to, it will be useful to work together on this, I would say.
The other thing is that it's an enormously dynamic situation in terms of the economics, and we've struggled with trying to predict costs at the most general level, and I think one has to have a great deal of humility about doing that, and so the assistance in real time of experts helping us out, I think would be very useful. It was beyond our.
Fair enough.
The task force further recommends in slide 9, recognizing, of course, that we are merely making recommendations here. We are merely advisory, and of course, we can't delve too deep into some of this stuff, nor do we want to, but we do think it's important to consider the following: that CMLP develop a set of cost-effective energy efficiency initiatives, incentives, and measures that meet or exceed those offered by Massachusetts investor-owned utilities. That it convert CMLP's electricity supply to non-emitting resources with a target of achieving 100% from non-emitting resources by 2030. That CMLP consider alternatives to reduce barriers for adopting energy efficiency measures. And that CLP develop incentives to encourage users to switch from fossil fuels to electricity from clean energy sources for heating and transportation. Next slide. Is that 10? Okay. With respect to the next task force subcommittee, best practices, the focus was on determining what Concord is already doing and gathering information on strategies and tactics from other cities and towns and on existing and pending legislation. It is important to note that many other communities in Massachusetts and across the country, actually, are already far ahead of Concord in finding a path to greenhouse gas reduction. It is the hope of the task force that soon Concord will join these communities and even become a leader, which I do believe we can, and which we have done on so many important issues in the past. The task force also recommends an integrated approach, engaging other sectors beyond the energy sector, including the built environment, water and waste management, and agriculture to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Speaking for myself, one of the frustrations of this wonderful exercise has been how limited in time we have for such a deep subject. And one of the reasons we focused on CMLP, partly because of the charge, but also because it was the most significant source for us to get some significant, impacts, which is not in any way to lessen the importance of agriculture, water, built environment, other sectors, and we hope that that will be undertaken in the future with more detail than we have. That is, in fact, a brief overview of our report, which brings us to the next steps. And as I said, the first point to make is that it's not complete. And by that, not only do we mean that it's not complete because we're receiving additional public comment, it's because it's not complete. We have some sections that we want to flesh out, we want to describe in more eloquently, with more care to detail and that sort of thing. So it's not complete in two respects, because of the comments coming in and because we have a little more work to do, and we will finish it by March 15th. Second, at the suggestion of the Select Board, and Mike talked about this, we have drafted a warrant article for the upcoming meeting, and that brings us to slide 11. And as I think Mike indicated, the warrant article was a subject of a lot of discussion, but it does reflect where we really think things need to go if we are wanting to participate very actively and forthrightly in this huge global issue. The article, in essence, seeks town approval of the goals in our report and funding for a director of energy or sustainability or whatever you want to call it, and for a consultant. And as Mike suggested, because of this, the task force will be active through town meeting. And Mike, I hope that, assuming that we are extended, that the amended charge will reflect that, and it will reflect the reasons why, so the public is aware too about what's going on with us. So that's it. Again, thanks so much for this opportunity. I think that it would be time, money, resources well spent for Concord to become part of the response to anthropogenic climate change.
Thank you very much, Pam.
Yep.
And again, my thanks to all the members of the committee. To me, I think the way I begin to think about this is that we tried to set this task force up to help us get our arms around a very complicated matter so that we could begin to focus the town's attention on its future. Mm-hmm. And irrespective of particular details, in this warrant article and on your very early slide where you laid out your recommendations, to me, one of the key components is to develop a plan to be implemented as opposed to developing a perspective and a framework for it. So I think the warrant article says purposes of developing and making public available an operational plan to achieve. I think your early slide has some different language, same intent, but different language. So this is indeed a step forward for the town. And if you're at all knowledgeable about energy matters, this is not this is not a modest proposal. This is would be aligned with some significant climate agreements, but it's an aggressive plan.
Are solar panels allowed in the historic district?
If they're
I'm
not
wondering whether
visible,
because that seems to be something where there's a little bit of a conflict, where historic town.
Actually, that's really
Woodward might
interesting.
know.
That came up in one of our first public meetings, examples of unintended
Yeah.
conflicts where you might have the Historic District Commission actually saying no to solar
It's
panels.
not historic as such.
But, not to get off on legal niceties, but the town of Bedford, there's a lawsuit now because the church, the Unitarian Church in Bedford, wanted to put solar panels out. They were told no by the Historic District Commission, I think, and that's in court now, and there may be settlement discussions going on, but that's litigated.
Hopefully, we
right
could
now.
avoid that
Yeah, but I
type
think
of
that's the kind of
process.
stuff,
But,
it's again, an excellent.
I mean, I'm just wondering, there are probably a number of regulations we have that unintended consequences may prevent.
And actually, just on that point again, I think one of the things that we could not do, which we wish we were able to do, is do an inventory and start to understand where do these apparent conflicts reside, and in the short term, have an immediate minor fix with, the policy statement that would start trying to, give these boards with conflicting responsibilities some guidance from you.
so I want to just add that, after my several years, 3 years as the HDC liaison, this came up frequently when homeowners were interested in installing solar. It was during the solar challenge particularly. And the guidepost that they used in making decisions is whether it was visible from the road, as is any of the other decisions that they make. So a home that's situated in such a way that it's southern facing was not on the main roadway. The solar panels were allowed. Became questionable about if they were on the front of the house, where it changed or altered the historic view of the home. More work can be done, certainly, but it was probably several years' worth of discussions on case by case, trying to apply the metrics for Historic District Commission decision-making.
Did you want to comment?
Well, I was just going to point out that example is just one of hundreds of examples of the kind of dynamic system that Concord is as a municipality. And I think that's one of the reasons that the task force has this recommendation of developing an integrated approach so that we're not trying to just deal with a series of tactics to solve this problem.
I
But
think
something that's really
methane leaks,
integrated.
we've had a couple of issues of those and what is required by the provider, and it's not adequate, but that's a state issue rather, I think, than a town. But there are.
Yeah, and picking up on Elisa's point, there's the integrated approach. The structural suggestion we're making with respect to the director speaks to this issue a little bit, because what we are realizing is that there are so many independently operating entities, which is so common in major, bureaucracies and other things, that it would be very difficult to weave those together without an overarching director to help make that happen.
But I think also within the comprehensive long-range plan, that's one of our charges, because we are using the sustainability approach of the American Planning Association. So that's already been a thread that's been picked up in our early committee work. And
Yeah, and this action is timely in that sense. The Long-Range Planning Committee is
Absolutely.
working, and the Life Plan's engaged in developing a strategic plan. So hopefully these can be integrated.
Well, and I think the recommendations that were up on, we saw earlier, call for that integration, to have this report be integrated into the current strategic plan, the life plan, and also be included in the comprehensive long-range plan. So it's the beginning of having that integrated look at how we can affect our energy future.
Does the board have
Thank you.
other questions
Thank you.
that you want to ask? Does anybody on the board have other questions that you want to ask? I'd be happy to entertain some comments from the public, just as long as we're not here to sort of debate it, but of clarifying questions or something you didn't understand or a point you'd like to make. Yes, ma'am, I saw your hand, so please.
You
No,
have to come to the microphone,
you have to come up
to a
here
microphone.
and sit down. You don't have to sit down, but you have to tell us who you are and where you live.
Yes, well, I'm Mary Ellen Walters. I live at 167 Monument Street. And as far as the solar panels, I just installed them on my home last year and had no problem with the HDC.
Great,
Good.
Thank you for the example.
Yeah.
excellent, we like
And I
that.
think they're making improvements in solar panels that they don't look like solar panels. They look like
They're starting to look like
tiles.
tiles, and they're even starting to talk about glass, so.
Yeah,
Any other comments? All right, so I would like to entertain a motion from the board to extend the life of this committee and through town meeting with the final report to be delivered on the 19th. And so if somebody could.
so moved.
Okay, and second, then I would say, and the reason for extending the life of the committee through town meeting is so that, in fact, it's our article, this is a selectman's article, because the committee report into us. But once we've made the motion on the town, it would be, I think, important for the committee, which has the facts, to be able to comment and answer questions as opposed to us. So I'd like to have them still constituted.
Makes sense.
Thank you, Mr. Ray. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. And thanks again to Pam and Elise, Brian, Dan, and Wally. And to John, even though he's
John.
not here. Yep, and we had lots of folks attending not only the public hearings, but even the meetings.
The weekly meetings.
Terrific. All right, next item on the agenda is the operation of PEG Access Television. Chris, do you want to
Sure.
tee this up for us?
Just a little bit of history on PEG Access, or Public Educational Governmental Community Access Television. Since the time the Select Board first entered into a franchise agreement with Comcast or its predecessors, originally in the 1980s and 1990s, the company, the television cable access, Neshoba TV originally, and then I don't recall who, AT&T, I think. Then they changed hands several times. They provided a cable studio and staff to broadcast select board meetings and town meeting. And then when the license came up for renewal in 2004, Comcast announced that they didn't want to provide those local PEG access services and have the employees work for the company, which they originally did. So they asked the town to take that over. We discussed it at that time and decided that what most communities were doing, and we agreed to request that a 501c3 nonprofit group be created to provide this service, so the town wasn't in the business of providing PEG access service. And then when the last license, the board renewed the Comcast agreement in 2014. Other communities began to provide public television services as part of the town operation. Comcast currently pays 4.8%. That was part of our license renewal conversations with Comcast. Originally, it was 4.5% in 2004, and we increased it to 4.8% of their revenue generated in Concord is paid back to the town for the PEG access local access television. So that amounts to about $400,000 a year. When I sat down to negotiate a renewal of the agreement in 2015 with CCTV, they requested another 10-year agreement. During the 10 years, that was a very long time. There was much that I thought could be improved in the agreement between the town and CCTV. So we agreed on a 3-year agreement, and it was delayed by a year, so it didn't start until 2015, and it runs through October of 2018. At that time, I was clear with CCTV that my preference would be to operate it as the town of Littleton has started to do, to operate it as a town service, that the money, about $400,000 is paid per year to the town, Originally, the checks were just signed over to CCTV, and we had no say over how the funds were spent or anything like that. It was a hands-off arrangement. We've now switched that arrangement and set up a fund, a cable access fund. Funds can only be spent on cable access per the license agreement with Comcast and town meeting vote, so that it can't be used for police services or anything else. And now they invoice us. The arrangement with CCTV is now that they invoice us for the services they've provided, and we pay more or less after the fact. It's generally partway through the quarter we get an invoice from them. But the CCTV had amassed an enormous amount of money, over $1 million at the time that we were signing the agreement, had been set aside for capital improvements. But my concern was that there was a lot of local access service I would have liked to have seen, coverage of the school committee meetings, the finance committee meetings, other town events. And to their credit, they did expand to cover the school committee several years ago and have started with the finance committee, I think about a year ago, perhaps. So they have responded to our request for additional coverage. But it's my sense that looking at how Somerville, Littleton, Quincy, some other communities operate this, we have a third party sort of in between the town deciding we'd like to have the historic district covered, or whatever community meeting we would like to have covered. Kind of have to consult and see if they have the staff to cover it, and sometimes it's a negotiating process with a third party. Whereas if this was a town operation, we could just say, cover the Concord Fair, have a camera there, and we would allocate the resources and be accountable for that. So we have this. We put this third party in between as a sort of to be at arm's length, so the town government wasn't making decisions relative to what got broadcast to the public, out of concern that the town government might suppress free speech and community contact. But I understand that Town of Concord residents put forth very little. The P is the public, what the public might do. Somebody wants to put on a cooking show or a fishing show or something that they do on their own, or political, let's talk about politics or religion, what have you. The public has a right to broadcast those things on the public access channel. The E and the G stand for educational programming and governmental. So it's a good idea to stay at arm's length on the public content so that we're not suppressing or encouraging one type of public speech or another. But I feel like there's not much of that that's going on. We don't have people knocking down our doors to present their own cooking shows or religious shows or what have you. But we do have, I think, an interest in covering educational activities, things that are going on in the schools, as well as governmental. So I did indicate we have a 3-year agreement with CCTV that, again, runs from October 1st, 2015 through September 30th, 2018. So we're about halfway through that 3-year agreement. And I think it's worthwhile exploring whether we would want to have a negotiated separation arrangement with CCTV to go our separate ways. They've done a great job for us. The service is dramatically better than when Comcast provided the service in-house. But I think we could step it up a little bit and be a little bit more responsive. Again, no criticism of CCTV, but we're the ones that sort of hear directly from the residents what they want to hear, and sometimes getting programs produced that reflect the things that we hear is difficult to have happen. So I've asked Kate Hodges, the assistant town manager, to put together the memo that you saw with the packet as a preliminary cut at things. I do think, again, with $400,000, there's sufficient money there to provide professional staff and to set money aside for capital improvements as well as to run the operation. And I think we could wait till the 3 years are out, another year and a half or so in the fall of 18. We could just wait that out and then not renew at that time. But I think it's worth exploring whether a negotiated mutual termination of the agreement or on an early basis would be considered. So my recommendation is that we study this until sometime in April, sometime before town meeting, and if it seems like a good idea, that we shoot for an implementation of it after town meeting, so maybe June or July. So I've proposed that to CCTV. I've met with some of their board members. I've met with their executive director. Kate is now meeting with the executive director on a regular basis. I'm not prepared to make a recommendation to you at this time. I think a key missing piece is the conversation with Carlisle. How would they be impacted? The current arrangement is Concord contributes about $400,000 toward the operation. Carlisle contributes about $100,000. So we pay 80%, they pay 20%. And it's not clear to me how they would like it to continue. The studio is at the high school. It's a little bit undersized. I think CCTV would like to have more space available, but they're pleased with the modern technology that's been put in there. And how it would work with Carlisle remains to be seen. They do a lot of their own programming. I understand there's more private citizens that like to do public television broadcasting, and they cover a lot. They have volunteer camera people, so they cover a lot of their Council on Aging events and a lot of their other community events through volunteers. So I haven't had a conversation yet with Carlisle, but from the looks of it, I think if the board is willing, I think it could work as it does in Littleton pretty effectively to have town staff, town employees covering the PEG access television. So
the way it would work if we did this is essentially the current employees of CCTV would become town employees? Is that
That's
the
right.
way it would work?
That would be my recommendation, yes, for at least the term of the original agreement. So I felt like I could make a commitment to the staff, if this was to go forward, to retain the existing staff for the period when the contract would have expired, and I wouldn't have recommended that we have a follow-on contract to that. So
Have you had a chance to talk with the director of CCTV?
Kate has talked with Tamara Green several times and did correspond last week. And the board is fully versed about this. They're aware that we're considering it. They're open to discussing it. I think they have some questions, but they're, as I understand it, I don't want to speak for them, but they're willing to discuss it. Is that fair representation, Kate?
I'm sorry. I'm Kate Hodges, Assistant Town Manager. We had a conversation in December with several of the board members, myself, John Harris, who's our Purchasing and Budget Administrator, and Tamara Green. And, I thought that it went well. It was talked about, what the purpose of PEG is and, how much goes into each bucket. And we talked about what would the town gain from that. And I liked the idea of having CCTV as a town department because it brings them into the fold, meaning that they get a seat at the table. So if there's something that it's of particular interest that's going on, that they have firsthand knowledge of it, it's a little easier than calling and requesting. Perhaps it's more self-driven, self-motivated. It kind of marries pretty nicely with the public information side of things, where we're trying to be a little bit more responsive to what our community is looking for, using all of the media that we have, including social media and our website reform. And this is just another way of getting the word out. So my understanding was that, nobody wants this to just be the government channel, that a lot of, people aren't necessarily interested in turning on the television and watching every town committee or every town board's meeting.
No
Some
offense.
people would.
That's hard to believe, isn't it?
And some do really enjoy that, but there are other things that we could do, rebroadcasting of events or even discussions. And then the education piece is not only broadcasting things on the educational side, but using some of our assets that CCTV has to educate other people to do things. I worked in Littleton at the time that they were taking over their cable, and because I was involved with the community education aspect, we actually had a pretty good partnership where we were trading people to do either through externships or internships or even just general community volunteers. So I think this, under some of the human services categories or even the senior tax work-off, could be helpful to expanding programs.
They're located at the high school and do a fair number of teaching programs with the students, as I understand. And
Yes.
I would hope that could continue, because I
Yes.
think that I gather is of a lot of value to a number of them.
Let me broaden that question. If this becomes a town entity, how does it interact with the regional district? How would it interact with the regional district?
How can we share it?
Because right now they interact with the town of Concord, the town of Carlisle, the regional district, but if this was a town function, how would that work?
So there isn't a current lease with the regional high school, and that would be one thing that I think I'd start with, is that execute a lease. I think CCTV has tried to get a formal lease document, but I think it'd be helpful to have an agreement on how the studio can be used. So I would start with that. But then I think it's very similar. The town has relations with the regional high school for playing fields and for other facilities. We have ongoing relationships on, sharing
Well, I'm just
resources.
thinking, part of it is a concern, and I'll throw the public part of PEG. How would we ensure that the public's access to this is protected?
Mm-hmm.
And I would throw the high school in. How would we ensure that the regional district's access is protected? For example, would they have to ask us if they could broadcast a regional school committee meeting
Or football game.
or football game? Or,
They would ask us to do that because the CCTV currently, or the PEG Access Fund, provides the resources. If the school regional school committee wants to do something on their own with their own staff, produce a program, and then hand us the tape, that's easily. But if they want to use staff time, town staff time, to cover a football game or a graduation ceremony, yeah, that would be scheduled, and our intention would be to continue the programs that the town has become accustomed to seeing.
So what happens when Carlisle wants their select board meetings or NRC meetings covered, if the staff are Concord staff?
So that's the question that I have in my mind, is exactly how would it work? There's a couple of ways that we just simply continue the same arrangements. There's 5 staff at CCTV right now, and so 20% of the resources and 20% of the staff are, so presumably Carlisle's paying for 1 full FTE of the 5 employees. So they might want to continue that arrangement, and we continue to share the service, or they may want to provide their own staffing on their own and still use the studio. So it is a little bit complicated how it would work if Carlisle, they have money, they have $100,000 that
Be a
Comcast,
time and
but
materials
it
kind
could
of
be
thing?
an hourly rate, or it could be a shared operation. So we'd really need to explore that further, what Carlisle's preference is.
Is it assumed that the assets that CCTV has, the various cameras, and you had an Agenda A, which is fairly extensive, is that 1/5 owned by Carlisle?
Actually, go ahead, Kate.
No. Under the terms of our agreement, Concord actually owns most of that, but in the memo that I issued to the town manager, I had said that my recommendation would be that the equipment that's installed in Carlisle would remain with Carlisle.
Yeah, I saw the,
And that kind of also goes into the question that you had previously, which is that there's 2 different operations that we can go through. An intermunicipal agreement, which seems to probably be the easiest. If we set a number of what we think it is for them to have one continue on with their 1 full-time employee, and then obviously we have to track that and revisit it every year or every other year. The other is a pay-as-you-go. That's a little bit more difficult administratively, but certainly not insurmountable. We would just have to come up with a number of what each of the services that can be provided costs, and putting in, time, but also use of equipment and electrical use and anything else that's there. But I think once we have the table set up, then it's as simple as filling out a ticket or some type of mechanism.
Has there been any communication with Carlisle, or are those watching tonight going to be the first one?
I've spoken with I advised Carlisle that we were having this conversation. I've spoken with the town administrator from Carlisle a couple of times on the phone to discuss this, and they're aware that we're having this conversation tonight, and are very interested to
They'll
hear
have
what it
their own
turns out.
conversation.
So is that relationship beneficial to Concord? To be supporting the Carlisle?
That was frankly one of my concerns, is that Carlisle is very attentive to. They have a lot of volunteers that cover a lot of programs, and about 50% of the programming on CCTV was Carlisle related, and rightly so. But again, Concord is paying 80% of the bill. And I do think by having a little more direct connection between the town of Concord and the television operation, we can control a little bit better, what access we have to the resources.
What programs go out.
Right.
Right.
Tom asked a question about assets. What about unspent capital funds, money?
So
I don't know.
We've
I
been
haven't looked
working
at the budget
to
for a
whittle down.
while.
At one point, I think the CCTV had amassed in the neighborhood of $1.5 million, a lot of which went to outfit the studio. So they did well to set the money aside so they could outfit the studio properly. But then at the conclusion of that, I think they had $600,000 or $700,000 still in the bank. And I was anxious to have the FinCom covered and other meetings covered and, programming, and while the money was sitting in a bank. So we changed the arrangement with that contract so that we required them to spend down the resources. And in the meantime, we've been collecting the revenue from Comcast. So we've got over $500,000 in our fund that we were just holding as they spent down. So I think they are around a $200,000 of working capital. And so that will be subject to some conversation in the next few months.
So what's the path forward with that?
So my suggestion is to get the board's consent, and not agreement to anything right now, but just consent to continue the conversations, specifically talk about how Carlisle would work. We have a long-time arrangement with the town of Lincoln for Board of Health services. So Concord staff provide health services to the town of Lincoln, so septic system inspections, restaurant inspections, other health-related services. Concord staff provide those services to Lincoln residents, and a very satisfactory arrangement. And so that could be the model for how we work with Carlisle. Alternatively, if Carlisle would prefer to hire their own staff and purchase their own equipment and simply want to use the studio, then it might be an hourly rate for using the studio and the studio staff that we employ, that sort of thing. So we need some further discussion with Carlisle about that.
But I assume that the school itself, being a regional high school, and the interaction with the students who are both Concord and Carlisle would continue, but also be worked out so that it's not a...
Right. So there's no problem there. I wouldn't expect any problem providing access to the regional high school, whether or not, however Carlisle decides it would like to be treated, will continue to provide access to the CCHS.
I'd like to make sure we had some language. I have no idea how to do it, about public. So we'd still want to be able to protect the public's right to...
Generally, Kate found that that's done through policies.
Yes, there's a huge amount of mandates that we have to, up to and including that we have to be able to have an educational component. So, and I'm not saying that we don't want to. There's also we need to have a certain amount of public as well. What we don't need to do is differentiate between, because it's a regional Concord and Carlisle, but we would like the ability to have some time and maybe entice some other folks from Concord to have more of the public. And that can be in a number of different forms. It just doesn't have to be someone that wants to do their own show. There can be some other type of public, whether it be festivals or anything like that. So we could have a loose interpretation of it, but we need to have more of it, yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like from this discussion that you're looking for us basically for the go-ahead to continue these discussions, and I'm hearing that there's a lot of interest and potentially positive outcomes if we could work something out. So are you asking for this board's basic to continue with these negotiations?
Correct. Because the alternative is you would basically leave things as they are for another 18 months and let the contract with CCTV expire, and then put this arrangement in place. But it seems to me we might as well have the conversation now with Carlisle, with CCTV, if we can keep the existing staff.
I think in fairness to the staff as well.
Yeah.
So
and before the contract runs out, do it with the current
It's a little bit complicated, so a lot of effort will have to be dedicated by Kate and less so by me. So before we embark on a serious effort to work this out, I wanted to be sure this was something that you're comfortable with.
Well, I think it's certainly worth pursuing.
Yeah.
I think we... you say Carlisle is using more services than we are, and
well, they're putting on more programs than we are. It's not they're taking advantage. They just have volunteers and others that are getting things done, and I'm not sure what the problem is for us. But
so, Mike, when your cooking show is ready,
I have a couple of scripts I could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate all your support.
Yeah.
Excellent.
I don't know, I haven't had a meal yet.
I don't see any, I don't think there's a need for a motion. I think it's a sense of the
Yep.
board that we'd like you to continue these discussions and come back to us when you're ready for us
Perhaps
to
a month or
have
two.
more
That'd be great.
substantive
Okay.
conversation.
Thanks, Pete.
Thank you.
Thanks.
The annual amount when Comcast sort of gives the funds, is that done on a quarterly basis?
It's done on a quarterly basis. We
Okay.
just received the check. I was concerned that Concord's broadband service might be eating into Comcast revenue, but it has continued to increase gradually, but have risen from 96,000 per quarter to recently 98, so it's not gone
Make an
down.
increase. Let me ask if there are any brief comments that the public would like to make. Court, would you like to start?
Court Booth, 144 Wright Road. I have not read the memo, so I claim ignorance. But I would like to suggest that the board deliberate this very carefully. We've used the word control, and I think we've got to look very carefully at what that means. Control over content is one thing, control over the funding is another, control over staffing is another. I'm not certain that it's in the best interest of the town to exercise control over the programming. Now, I should mention I was very involved at the founding of this, and last month rejoined the board, but I don't speak for the board tonight. The intent in the very beginning was to see that the town could have its cake and eat it too. Could have to have a robust PEG program, but not be in the position of defending how much of this and how much of that was on air. And I think it could well put us in that position. Now, we could say it's a non-issue if it's just cooking, so to speak. I don't mean to disparage it, but, the public part. Or put that into the decision-making realm of the independent corporation and put the government and school under the auspices of the town. But I think you can have the same argument with school and town activities. How much of this or how much of that gets to the airwaves.
I think it's a good caution, Court.
So I would just ask that we be quite deliberate. I think it belongs in the public record that the select board and school committee sit with the board of directors of this nonprofit corporation. So I would hope that the lines of communication have indeed been quite open. I think it's debatable, is Carlisle the beneficiary of more than it pays for or not? Citizens do produce more programming. You could argue Concordians are the beneficiary, because at least somebody is pushing local content, no, seriously, into the airwaves. But I think we can agree that the amount of activity coming from Concord volunteers producing content is not what we had hoped day one, was not what we had hoped year 10, continues to be somewhat disappointing.
Well, thank you. Appreciate your comments.
All right. We look forward to the conversation.
Another comment?
Another board member.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I already introduced myself, but I'll do it again. Karen Kugel, and I am a newbie board to CCTV, and just started working with them as a volunteer programmer with a program called Living and Learning that I started up in July. And so I'm fairly new to this concept and the process here, so forgive me if I, step on anyone's toes. But I think what does need to be considered is, as Court is saying, there's lots of responsibilities here that need to be assessed. So I definitely recommend some sort of a task force that really assesses that. I also think it's important to assess what the community already knows about CCTV and the public access part in particular, because I think a lot of people don't know what it is or what it could be. As I've gone to pool parties over the summer and talked to people in Concord about what this is about, and I'm all about getting young people involved in it, not just from a technical perspective, as a media perspective, a potential career path, but also as a way to get them engaged in civic activities, okay? And I think there's enormous potential for that. So when you talk about Concord, Carlisle, I think you have to look at the fact that it is a regional high school. And as Court brought out, you have, even if the Carlisle people have been proactive in actively doing programs, the whole community benefits from that. So maybe we need to put a fire under more Concord people to get involved. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that if you look at it from a high school perspective, you do have the two towns being represented. And if we are going to reach out to more youth opportunities, then you would not necessarily, or at least you want to think twice about severing off or how you work out that arrangement between the two town constituencies. So there's that, there's the management piece, and then there's the public access piece about what gets programmed. So
appreciate your comments.
that's what I want to say.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
More to come.
All right.
So rest assured, we'll have many more discussions about this as we get it more teed up in a way that it can be discussed. So thank you both for your comments. We've already reviewed item number 10, which is the financial policies. We'll pick that up again. Let me ask if there are additional public comments on any matter that the public would like to comment on. Seeing none, we'll go to committee liaison reports. Tom?
The Committee on Disability, Phil Posner came to the meeting and discussed the Junction Village project, answering questions. And there's going to be a committee member reviewing for ADA compliance and whatever suggestions it might be. But there also seems to be a bit of a problem with the Beatty Pool access and the disability, that's there's a concern that somehow it's difficult to get back on, and they're going to look into that a bit further.
Do you know?
No, I'm not familiar.
In the diving pool, I believe it was. That,
Oh, the new lift and the diving pool.
yeah, that may not be working in the best way for everyone. The Public-Private Partnership Committee met as well, and they've, I think, given a report, a letter that we've all received, but that was a lively meeting as well. The Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, there was an update on how that was going. I wasn't able to make that because all three of these meetings were on the same night, but there was an update in terms of how things are going on that, and Chris gave the report also about the state funding. So that's moving forward, and I think is going to be very exciting. And you and I attended the Concord Business Partnership, where there's also Phil Posner gave a presentation about Junction Village. So I think the concern that I had initially, that there wasn't enough outreach going on, they clearly have gotten the message, and there's a lot of communication going on now. So.
Jane and I. Yes. Yeah. Good. Jane?
I attended the Natural Resources Commission meeting and the Planning Board. The Planning Board heard greater details on a proposal to develop Keuka Road, or Keuka, the potential subdivision, which would be off of 62. I don't know how to describe it. If you know where Florio, it's that area of 62 or behind 62 between where Walden Rehabilitation, I believe it's called, in the back behind the houses that front the road. There's a, I guess, a paper road back there. And that was a lively conversation, as it has been when I've seen it in front of the planning board before. In front of the NRC, we heard a number of applications, all of which were fairly pro forma. Matt Seppi, who we know from 1888, from that subdivision was back for a couple other things. I think we have a new friend in Concord, and he's quite active. One interesting point that came up was a discussion of the Chamberlain Park Bridge reconstruction funding, which is the bridge that goes behind. Now, Chamberlain is a word we use a lot in Concord. This bridge is the one behind Bank of America, and that connects back to Main Street on
Lowell Road.
Lowell Road. It was the first I'd heard of its needs, and I'm sure we'll hear again. That's all I have to report.
Steve?
I have nothing to report.
Alice?
Well, Pam said everything there was to say about all the meetings with the Energy Futures Task Force. I do want to commend the work of the committee. They have been amazingly busy and thoughtful, debating with each other, creating new opportunities for thought, and creating, I think, what is basically a really strong leadership plan. So we'll take this all under advisement, but I spent a lot of time with these folks. The White Pond Advisory Committee is meeting again. We are working on a new charter, so at some point, I know they came and met with this board.
They did.
We're meeting with Marcia and Delia to discuss the charter with them as well. They're also in need of a new member. We should check whether there are any green cards that came in for White Pond Advisory Committee. You okay?
Good.
And the Board of Health is meeting. They also had to postpone a meeting because they didn't have a quorum. I think we still need.
I have a meeting with a potential applicant Thursday.
Excellent. Perfect. That'd be great because they're starting to really ramp up for implementation of the polystyrene committee and the hearings on potential product replacements. I think those are my major ones. Thank you.
Thank you. I met with the Tax Fairness Committee. They're busy making sure they're all set for the town meeting where the home rule petition that was approved by the legislature now has to come back to town meeting for approval. And then following the approval, if it happens at town meeting, there has to be again in a general election approved by the town. And so we were trying to work out the dates when that could happen and like, so progress along there. Hugh Cargill Trust Committee I met with, continuing with their business, finding it quite a number of people in town who are in need of help from that committee, so that's constructive. I met with Finance Committee 2 weeks running where a major item was Junction Village project, and I think particularly last Thursday's meeting was really beneficial. The chair, Ms. Miller, after the introductory kind of remarks, literally went around the room, and every single member of the Finance Committee got to ask the developer and Mr. Posner from the Housing Corporation whatever questions they had about this project, and I thought it was really an informative and useful meeting.
I watched that on CCTV.
And then I attended 1,600 school committee meetings. No, I'm just kidding. I attended a number of school committee meetings, and the reason I attended so many of them was because the school committees were very busy finding a new superintendent for us. And they were successful in so doing. I don't know if it's a done deal yet, but they had made the offer to a woman, Dr. Laura Hunter, who's a current assistant superintendent of schools at Duxbury. And I just want to thank and commend the school committees, both of them, for not only making a good choice, but for the process that they went through. It was a rigorous, open, thorough process. They had, I don't remember the exact numbers, but probably close to 50 various stages of applications. The 15 or so member screening committee got it down to, I think it was 7, and then made a recommendation to the school committees of 3 finalists. The school committees deliberated the 3 finalists and had a public session for each of the 3 finalists a couple of weeks ago, one each evening. I was able to attend two. Jane attended them as well. They were very informative, and if you watched it, and then watched the school committee come to a conclusion, it was quite remarkable. So I think congratulations to Dr. Hunter. We'll look forward to welcoming her to town, and thanks to the school committee for all the hard work you did to get us a new superintendent. It's going to be very exciting, I think.
And one of the highlights of Dr. Hunter's public interview, that I noted, and I want to put it on Chris's radar screen immediately, was her interest in and history of public participation in all committees, and with his role would stop at the borders of the school. So I think we'll all get to know her.
It was very exciting. All right, miscellaneous correspondence. I've had a few, I won't go into all of them, but the one set of correspondence that I have had that I want to bring to your attention, a number of questions and inquiries about whether Concord wanted to become a sanctuary city. So I briefly met with the town manager, I think, if it comes to us. Before it comes to us, I want to understand what that exactly means in terms of the law. And most of the cities that have adopted it that I know of are city forms of government, not town meeting forms of government. So I'm trying to understand whose authority is to make this designation of what it means. So as soon as we have those facts organized, we can get it on our agenda to talk about.
But to that point, again, the citizens that have reached out to me about this have been, it's a wonderful outpouring of care, and pride in Concord and care for others. So.
All right, so we'll pick that up when we can. Yep. All right, committee nominations.
Yeah. So I move to nominate Marianne Lippert of 19 Cranberry Lane to the Conservation Restrictions Stewardship Committee for a term to expire on May 31st, 2017, and Neil Ryder of 96 The Valley Road to the Conservation Restrictions Stewardship Committee for a term to expire 5/31/2019.
So this first one would expire this
17.
May.
Yep,
It's an unexpired term that he's filling.
Town clerk and house.
Well, this is good. I know that committee, and talking with members of it, have had vacancies for